Two Storm Shadow missiles hung beneath its wings like silent oaths of vengeance. Mechanics in oil-stained suits stepped back, their faces pale in the blue light. Somewhere, deep within the cockpit, a heartbeat echoed louder than the engines. This was not a stealth fighter. It had no invisible coating, no modern radar shield, no escape, only will. At precisely 7:23 in the evening, the bomber began to roar. The earth shook as turbines screamed, and a voice whispered through the radio. "Good luck, brother. Some flights are not meant to return, yet they change history forever." The engines of the Su-24 roared into a metallic symphony as the bomber climbed through the pale clouds above Khmelnytskyi province. Below, the airbase shrank into a cluster of dim lights swallowed by darkness. The pilot, callsign Falcon 1, adjusted the oxygen mask. Every breath sounded like the slow turning of a clock counting down to destiny. Altitude 5,000 meters. Heading northeast. The radar screen glowed a faint green, painting the night with distant echoes of enemy eyes. The storm shadows beneath the wings hummed, alive, waiting to be released. In his headset, the calm voice of the ground controller broke the silence. "Wind steady. You're on course." "Godspeed," he replied quietly. "Copy. Copy." Beginning final approach. For 20 minutes, nothing moved except the stars. Yet within that stillness, the pilot's mind was a storm. He remembered his wife's last words before the sortie, "Promise me you'll see the sunrise again." He had smiled, but deep down, he knew the truth. Some missions were not meant to have a sunrise. As he crossed the border, the cockpit lights dimmed automatically. The radar warning system blinked red. Dozens of signatures appeared. Russian S-300 batteries had begun to stir. Falcon 1 reduced altitude to just 100 meters, flying over treetops and abandoned villages. Every house below was a blur, every flash on the horizon a potential death sentence. 15 kilometers to target. He whispered a short prayer, not to be saved, but to stay steady. The terrain radar showed hills ahead. Perfect cover. He descended lower still, the bomber's belly almost brushing the ground. In this dance between steel and soil, precision was survival. The storm shadows armed automatically, their guidance lights shifting from amber to green. "Target lock in 10 seconds, the onboard system announced. The pilot's fingers trembled once before tightening around the release lever. He could already see faint glows in the distance. The Russian forward command post. Somewhere in that cluster of lights were men planning an entire counteroffensive, unaware that death was coming silently through the night. Storm 1, ready. Storm 2, ready. He pulled the lever. Two flashes streaked into the darkness, cutting through the cold air like silver comets. The sky lit briefly as the missiles broke the sound barrier, vanishing toward the horizon. For a moment, the cockpit was filled only with the soft hum of the engines and the pilot's heartbeat. Falcon 1 exhaled. "It's done," he whispered. Then the radar screamed again. Missile locks, multiple. The Russians had seen him. He pushed the throttle to full. The Su-24 dove, hugging the ground, its engines howling like a wounded beast. Behind him, the night exploded in lines of fire. The first storm shadow reached its target in less than a minute. Through the clouded night, the pilot saw a distant flash owl. Then another, brighter, more violent. Seconds later, the earth trembled even from hundreds of kilometers away. A blinding mushroom of fire rose beyond the horizon. Inside that inferno lay the Russian forward command post, bunkers, maps, and voices that would never speak again. The strike was perfect. The storm shadows, these modern military equipment crafted for surgical precision, had cut through the concrete like blades through glass. For a heartbeat, Falcon 1 felt both triumph and sorrow. War had no heroes, only survivors. But the radar screamed again, sharp, urgent, merciless. Dozens of red triangles bloomed on the screen. S-300s, boops, perhaps even panzers. The hunter had become the hunted. Missile lock. Evade now. The onboard alert blared as a streak of light shot past the canopy. The aircraft shook violently. The left stabilizer groaned. Warning lights flared crimson. He pulled hard on the stick, forcing the bomber into a low-level evasive roll. The G-forces crushed him against the seat, every breath a struggle. Sweat flooded his eyes. The altimeter spun madly 50 meters, 40-35. At this altitude, the trees became claws, scraping the belly of the aircraft. Yet he held his course. Outside, Russian missiles tore the night open. Each explosion thundered like the wrath of gods, painting the landscape in flashes of white fire. The radio crackled the ground control screaming coordinates, his wingman shouting for update sayings. But Falcon 1 heard nothing except the mechanical pulse of the engines. He banked left, diving into a valley where the radar shadowed. The Su-24 howled through the gorge, a ghost of steel moving faster than sound. Behind him, two explosions merged into one as the enemy missiles collided mid-air, deceived by his sudden drop. He had cheated death by less than a second. The bomber clawed upward again, battered, buttered, but alive. Hydraulic pressure low, fuel line damaged. Yet the engines still roared. He exhaled, feeling the air burning inside his lungs. "Command post destroyed," he reported, voice hoarse. "Returning base." "Ah!" Silence answered. Then a trembling voice replied, "Copy that. Falcon 1, you made it." As he crossed back over Ukrainian airspace, the stars seemed closer. Below, the planes shimmered faintly beneath moonlight. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to breathe. When the landing lights of Kelnitsky base appeared on the horizon, a strange calm filled him, not victory, not relief, but gratitude. The Su-24 touched down with a heavy jolt, sparks trailing beneath its wheels. Mechanics ran toward the smoking aircraft as the canopy opened. He stepped out slowly, face streaked with soot, eyes hollow yet bright. The crowd erupted in cheers, but he said nothing. He simply looked at the horizon where the explosions had been, whispering to himself, "For those who did not return." Dawn bled slowly over the plains of Zaporizhia. The horizon burned with the dull glow of 1,000 engines. From the east, Russia's armored spearhead crawled forward. 60 T-14 Armata tanks, 80 BMP-3 infantry carriers, and convoys of trucks swollen with fuel and ammunition. Their engines groaned like a storm made of iron. From the bunker beneath the Dnipro, General Haveno watched the column through a satellite feed. To many, that line of steel was terror incarnate. To him, it was opportunity. "Every serpent has a soft belly," he muttered. "Let us strike there." The order went out. The order went out. 20 reconnaissance drones rose silently into the grey sky, their wings glistening with dew. Below, among the wheat fields, small strike teams waited, hidden inside barns, drainage ditches, and burnt-out houses. Each team controlled a swarm of suicide drones, some no larger than a hawk, each armed with a single explosive charge. Within minutes, data streamed back to headquarters. Every Russian vehicle was marked: fuel trucks, command carriers, ammunition lorries. The serpent's nerves were exposed. Phase 1, commence. Dozens of drones skimmed across the ground, barely higher than the grass. The first slammed into a BMP at the head of the convoy. The explosion flipped the 19-ton vehicle like a tin toy. Before the shockwave faded, a second drone hit a fuel truck and fire rose 100 feet, engulfing soldiers in molten air. Machine gun tracers filled the sky. The Russians fought back in panic, but their own bullets became betrayal. For every drone they hit, 5 more slipped through. Flames spread along the convoy like veins of fire. In the control room, one of Havanos' operators shouted, "We've lost the command feed. Our main drone is down." Darkness swallowed the screens. For 2 minutes, The entire operation hung by a thread. Then, a young Sergeant Aramola grabbed his personal UAV, a civilian model. "I can still see them," he cried, launching it into the smoke. The feed was grainy, trembling, but enough. He called out coordinates, his voice breaking through the static. Artillery responded instantly. Mortar shells fell in precise rhythm, guided by that shaky signal. In the chaos, the Russian formation broke apart. Tanks collided, trucks exploded, and the once mighty Armata line froze in place, trapped behind their own burning wreckage. "Phase 2, said Havano. 200 motorcycles burst from the tree line, roaring like beasts of iron. Each carried a driver and an anti-tank gunner, light and fast modern cavalry. They weaved between craters and flames, striking at the stalled tanks. RPGs flashed at 20 meters. The riders moved too quickly for the turrets to follow. One soldier fell, legs shattered, but refused to crawl away. He reloaded once more, aimed at the enemy that had wounded him, and fired his final rocket. The Armata before him erupted into a pillar of fire. In less than an hour, the steel serpent lay broken. 38 armored vehicles destroyed, hundreds of soldiers dead or captured. 4 of Havano's riders did not return. As the sun climbed higher, the field fell silent except for the crackle of burning diesel. Smoke coiled into the cold morning air, rising like ghosts. Havano looked at the screen, sound shard metal, twisted tracks, and small figures placing white flags upon the ground. He whispered to himself, "This is what intellect does to power." Across the plains, the smell of victory and loss mingled in the wind. Intelligence, courage, and speed had defeated mass and armor. The wolves of steel had devoured the serpent of iron. The silence that followed the Zaporizhzhia ambush did not last long. Vengeance came with the dawn. From across the Dnipro River, a thin hiss grew louder, a sound like insects before a storm. Soldiers looked up. The sky was no longer theirs. Dozens of white shapes glided above the tree line. Lancet, loitering munitions, Russia's invisible assassins. Their small electric motors purred softly, almost gentle, until they struck. The first impact shattered an artillery position. The second ripped through a mobile radar truck. Within minutes, the entire sector was on fire. Operators shouted, "Incoming!" Multiple, east and south, but there was nowhere left to hide. High above, the Z-16 reconnaissance drones surveyed everything. They moved with eerie calm, as if painting targets for death itself. One by one, they picked out Ukraine's vital systems, communication relays, mobile radars, anti-air batteries. At one site near Dnipro, a radar array known as ST-688 spun helplessly, unaware of what waited above. The Lancet dove from the clouds, silent and precise. The impact was instantaneous, a burst of orange flame that twisted steel into a molten knot. The explosion left a hole, not just in metal, but in the air defense network that shielded an entire city. From command, officers watched helplessly as the screens blinked red and dark. The sky had opened hard and cruel. Moments later, another wave appeared down, not from above, but from the sea. Off the coast near Crimea, unmanned boats raced through the surf, their hulls loaded with explosives. They cut across the waves like silver knives, their wake glowing in the moonlight. Their target, the Crimean Bridge, the artery that bound the peninsula to the mainland. But Russia had learned. Lancet drones patrolled the sky, circling like hawks. One spotted a boat skimming fast toward the pylons. The drone dived sharply, striking its bow. A fireball erupted, turning the suicide craft into splinters of burning wood and steel. Another boat tried to slip through under the shadows of the bridge. A Russian FPV drone chased it relentlessly, its camera feed relayed to a silent operator hundreds of kilometers away. Viewers on both sides would later watch that footage. The drone closing in, the sea spraying, the strike at the sternus, and the sudden stillness that followed. In a war once fought with rifles and tanks, this was something new. The battlefield had become a network of eyes and algorithms, each hunting the other. Machines now fought where men once stood. Numbers told their own story. Since the summer of 2022, more than 3,700 Ukrainian assets had been struck by Lancet sound code guns, self-propelled artillery, tanks, radars. 900 destroyed outright, 1,800 crippled beyond repair. These modern military equipment had turned the air itself into a weapon, equalizing rich and poor, strong and weak. Yet behind every statistic lay human breath, the operator guiding the strike, the soldier staring upward before the impact, the silence that followed. On a monitor deep underground, General Havanel watched the carnage unfold. The glow of the screens painted his face pale. "We are living in a new age," he murmured. "The enemy no longer sees us as men, only as data." He turned to his aides. "But remember this, even data can rebel." Outside, the sky hummed with unseen wings, a song of steel without mercy. The battlefields of this war had changed shape, yet their truth remained ancient. Steel, fire, algorithms, all had become instruments in the same eternal struggle between fear and resolve. From the blackened ruins of the Russian command post to the burning convoy in Zaporizhzhia, from the shattered radars of Dnipro to the drones circling the sea house. Every clash whispered one lesson: machines obey, but men decide. Falcon 1's bomber now rested silent at the far end of the airfield, its wings scarred, its paint blistered. Mechanics worked quietly around it, almost reverent, as though tending to an old warrior who had survived too long. The pilot sat nearby, his flight suit still smelling of smoke. When reporters asked how he had escaped, he only said, "I did not. I was carried by the machine and by something greater than both of us." That something greater rippled across the front lines. It was the same courage that guided Sergeant Molas's trembling drone, the same defiance that burned in the eyes of Havanel's riders. Their weapons differed, missiles, mortars, keyboards, but their heartbeat was one. The new war was no longer fought for territory alone. It was fought for perceptioners, for who could think faster, adapt sooner, and remain human amidst automation. Intelligence was now both sword and shield, yet even the sharpest intellect was nothing without will. In underground bunkers, young analysts watched drone feeds like chess players, their fingers dancing over screens, deciding the fate of unseen soldiers. In the skies, machines moved like ghosts, hunting by pattern, striking by probability. The line between man and metal blurred until the distinction itself became a casualty. General Havanel once wrote in his logbook, "The battlefield is not in front of us, it is inside us." He was right, because every command sent through fiber and satellite began as a thought bore. One spark of conviction in the mind of a human being. A war of intellect demands courage of a different kind. The courage to trust reason when chaos tempts instinct. The courage to choose restraint when machines offer annihilation. And so, amid the hum of circuits and engines, another kind of sound began to rise. The sound of voices refusing to yield their humanity. For every radar destroyed, a soldier rebuilt it. For every drone lost, a new pilot learned. For every strike that silenced a voice, 1,000 more whispered through the night, "We are still here." The war was teaching both sides something cruel and profound, that victory no longer belonged to those with the largest armies, but to those who understood the soul behind their machines. When historians look back on these years, they will not only count missiles and tanks, They will count choices. The moments when a single human being, armed with nothing but belief, defied an empire of metal. Because in the end, intellect gives direction, but will gives meaning. When the echoes of battle fade, what remains is not the smoke nor the wreckage, but the silence of understanding. In that silence, we see the truth that every generation of warriors must face as machines, may shape the field, but it is men who shape the outcome. The old Su-24 now rests in a hangar, its skin pitted with scars, its wings folded like the arms of a tired giant. It is more than just military equipment. It is a witness. It has seen fear, resolve, and the moment when courage outweighs survival. Across the border, fragments of destroyed tanks and drones lie scattered under the same sky. Each piece of military equipment once promised dominance, yet all of them now share the same failure, silent, rusting, and forgotten. But the men who wielded them, those who dared the impossible, live on in stories, in memories, in the pulse of nations that refuse to bow. Falcon 1 still visits the base sometimes. He walks past the old aircraft, running his hand along its cold frame. When asked why he keeps returning, he simply answers, because this machine once carried a soul. Perhaps that is the true legacy of this war. That behind every piece of military equipment, no matter how advanced or autonomous, there is a heartbeat that defines its purpose. Machines will evolve. Weapons will change. But courage straying pure, human courage dang, remains the one weapon no enemy can replicate. As the world stands at the edge of a new era, filled with algorithms, drones, and silent wars of data, may we remember the human spirit that gives these creations meaning. Because beyond the roar of engines and the blaze of missiles, there is a quiet vow whispered through generations: peace, freedom, and the will to fight, not for destruction, but for the right to endure. How far can one man go when he knows he might never return? The night air trembled as the old Su-24M trembled with it, its worn fuselage shimmering beneath floodlights that cut through the fog.